Good evening, everyone. To the hundreds in attendance and to the millions watching online, we welcome you to be here with us tonight. It's a privilege to get to fill in for Michael tonight. I don't want to say I'm glad he's gone because that sounds mean, but it's nice to be able to teach, so I appreciate him asking me, and I appreciate you coming out tonight. Do you remember back when you first got your license and you started to drive, like how freeing that was, how much freedom you felt with that? I would like to sometimes just drive with no real destination in mind and just, see what happens and enjoy that freedom, enjoy being able to go out, roll the windows down with music up. But if you were like me, sometimes you like music so much that maybe you think, I need to change the CD, and you look down for a second, and then you look up and you've swerved a little, and you just have to look up and you have to correct back to where you need to be. But I have found that life is really like that as well. A lot of times we get distracted by the things that are around us, and if we're not careful, we'll end up in one ditch or the other. And so we have to look up from time to time and kind of correct ourselves back to where we need to be. And that's true. Think about all the ways in life that's true. What about financially? Do you ever find yourself in a hole, maybe living paycheck to paycheck, and you say, I've got to stop going out to eat so much, I've got to cancel Netflix, I've got to do whatever the case may be, because financially I'm just not where I need to be, so I need to look up, I need to make some changes and some corrections before I get myself in trouble. What about fitness? And that's a sensitive topic for us, right? You remember a time when you used to be in shape if you're not right now? Think about how easy it was back when you were younger. You just eat whatever you want to, and you stay thin. But the older you get, the more you have to say, well, I'm not going to eat that sweet, not this time, and maybe never again if I value my health and being fit. And if we're not careful, sometimes we look up and we say, man, I haven't worked out in 6 months, and I really haven't been checking myself on what I eat, and it's time to correct back to the center. I need to get back to where I need to be. So the reason I bring that up is that the reality of where we are as the Church of Christ that meets at Oak Hill is that we have to look up at this point in our life as a congregation, and we have to realize that maybe we're headed somewhere that we don't exactly want to be, and we have to correct ourselves back to the middle. So let me explain what I mean by that. I think about in the Old Testament, I think it's Deuteronomy chapter 4, but God tells the people, you're going to go into the land and you are going to enjoy houses that you did not build. And you're going to eat from vineyards that you did not plant. But you better obey me, because just as I put you in that situation, I can take you out of that situation. Think about how the church came to be established in Rome. My knowledge of the history is a little spotty, but from what I understand, there was no congregation in this area. And a gospel preacher came to town, and some interested people rented an area, and there was a tent or something like that, and this man preached and converted several people. And from that, this congregation is one of the results of that happening. But if you think about it, I was not integral in the forming of the congregation at that time, as I don't think any of you were. But then even above and beyond that, I was not integral in the forming of Oak Hill. Oak Hill would be here whether or not I ever existed. And so in a way, I'm like the Israelites. I am enjoying a beautiful building that I put no time and no money, no blood, no sweat, no prayer into. And I'm very thankful to have this building because it's an amazing facility. I love it. I also enjoy a lot of the great programs that the congregation has in place, though I came up with none of them. I enjoy the fellowship that you and I have, how we hold each other accountable, how we encourage each other, the men's class. And you know what I had to do with all of those things and all of you being here? Almost nothing. Mainly nothing for almost everyone that's here. So my point is this: I'm enjoying, just like the Israelites, the benefits of the generations before me and all the hard work that they've put in, and to a large extent what some of you have put into this congregation. But what happens to the church in this country, and it's going to be cyclical. It was like this with the Jews. It was like this with the people in the New Testament. And it's like that with us. We're no exception. The generations roll on, but they're the same in a lot of ways as the generations before. But what we've done is we look up and we say, those people that sacrificed so much time, so much money, sold property so that land could be purchased and a building could be built. They had studies in their homes every night with candlelight and with the Bible or with Jewel Miller film strips, and they brought whoever would listen, and they studied with people, and because of that we have a wonderful group and a wonderful congregation here. But now as we think about ourselves and we compare ourselves to the Israelites, we have to think, well, what am I doing to continue that work, to continue that legacy, to continue the growth of God's nation and God's people? Because if I'm being honest, what I have done to a large extent in some ways is I have just enjoyed vineyards that I didn't plant and houses that I didn't build. And now as I look up and I realize, hey, look, I've been distracted to the left or to the right. I need to veer back to center. I realize I need to get busy in teaching people the gospel. You know, sometimes what happens when you're affluent is you spend time thinking about things that really aren't as important as the main thing. I think it was John McEnroe, the tennis player. His kids were pretty sorry. And somebody asked him one day, what happened to your kids? And he said they have affluenza. That is, they're too affluent. They don't know what it's like to grind, to work, to hunger and thirst after something. And so I have to realize that in a lot of ways, maybe I've enjoyed the prosperity of having large sister congregations, events that are in place, lots of members, active programs, wherever I travel. But I haven't necessarily contributed to those things as much as God might call me to do. So that's what I want us to think about tonight. I just want to invite you to consider the possibility that if you're like me, you might need to look up and see where you are spiritually from an evangelistic standpoint and say, I need to correct some things back to the way God would have me to do it. You know, you think about the culture of a company or a sports team or something like that. Almost always when a sports team wins a championship, there was some mantra or something that they said that tied them together. No one believes in us, or some African proverb that they brought in and really embodied, like with the Celtics when they won their championship. But that culture really does a lot. Well, in our culture, sometimes we've been distracted by these other things that aren't as important. And so we have to realize, okay, as a culture, we need to talk more about soul winning. It needs to be understood that has to happen. We need to say it from the pulpit. We need to say it in our classes. We need to talk about it when we hang out. Because if we don't, and we continue on this path, what will happen is there won't be a congregation in this city in how many ever years that might take. Okay? Now, God's kingdom is going to stand forever, isn't that right? I mean, we were promised that the gates of hell won't prevail against it. There will always be a church. There will always be a church of Christ as long as time stands. God promised that, and we know that that'll be true. There's always people that love God and want to do what's right. Even when Israel was at their lowest points, they had people that loved God and obeyed God. But that doesn't mean that there will be a church in this city. That doesn't mean there will be a church in this county or even in this state. And so while some of that is out of our control, telling people about the gospel is not out of our control. And it's our responsibility. And it's something we've just got to collectively decide to do, or we're going to be in trouble in a few years in a spot we don't want to be. So tonight what I want to do, when I think about the Old Testament stories, and I think about the Israelites, one thing I think about a lot is complaining, just a negative attitude. You know, when David got to the battlefield, he said, I'll fight Goliath, and they laughed at him, and he said, I'm not worried about the enemy. I know who is with me fighting for me. And that's what they should have seen. Yeah, I'm no match for Goliath, but God is a match for Goliath, and he's fighting with us. And so God would try to replace over and over their negative, can't do it, defeated attitudes. And so that's what I want us to think about tonight, because sometimes when we think about evangelism, there's some ideas that we have that are kind of defeated, and we're kind of off to a bad start right out of the gate. So the first thing I want us to think about is the idea that people do want the gospel. Now we're going to look at this in maybe a couple of different ways. The first one, if you want to take some notes, let's just think about people in the Bible, in the New Testament, that wanted the gospel, even though they were really unlikely candidates from our point of view. Okay, think about 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 9. Do you remember that list? Paul is going through the church in Corinth, and he's talking about how they used to be. Now that's the key, how they used to be. But as he goes through and he names, and he's talking about members of the church in Corinth. I mean, if you went to the Corinth Church of Christ, you would be sitting by someone that was on this list. The person leading singing might have been someone on this list. But he says that there were drunks, there were homosexuals, and there were those committing adultery. I mean, the man that was cheating on his wife gave that up. Everybody knew what was going on, but he gave it up and he became a Christian. The man that was known as a town drunk, people that were in homosexual relationships, they gave that up and they became Christians. I mean, can you imagine today, a lot of times we meet people and we prejudge them. Well, that person is tatted up and they talk bad and they're rude and they've been to prison and they would never want the gospel, and so we don't even invite them. We don't even ask them. We don't even give them the chance. But the church in Corinth was filled with people that used to be that way. You know, think about some of us, you know, where have we been in our lives? You know, if someone played our lowlight reel, that would be a very embarrassing thing. Or where would we be without the gospel? And that's a very scary thought. But number two, another example, you think about Acts chapter 8, and Lucian's done a great job in the book of Acts, but he talked last week about Saul, and you remember Saul was basically a serial killer, right? I mean, he did it with good intentions. He thought he was doing it for God, but he wasn't doing it for God. And Jesus came to him and said to stop that and to listen and to learn, and we know that he did, and he became a Christian. But can you imagine a murderer or a serial killer becoming a Christian? Well, that's not a very far-fetched thing because it happened in Acts chapter 8. Well, what about another example? You think about the 12 apostles that Jesus picked to be part of his ministry. One of them was a government employee, and one of them was a zealot, someone who religiously, fanatically hated the government. Now, how could two people like that get along in such close quarters? Well, they couldn't, except for Jesus. You know, and we're the same way. Sometimes we might go to church with people that don't look like us or act like us or think like us, and, you know, out in the real world, if it wasn't for the gospel, we might not get along with them. But because of Christ, we can get along with anyone. We love everyone, and everyone is welcome here and part of the family. But a government employee who was hated by most Jews and someone who hated the government to the point he was ready to kill them, both became Christians. How could someone set aside their political ideologies, talk less about the president, talk more about King Jesus? Well, they did then, and we can do it now. But think about this. Not only did people in the Bible want the gospel, that's obvious. Most of them had met Jesus or met someone who met Jesus, and the Holy Spirit was intervening, and they didn't even have to practice their sermons or work on delivery, but the Holy Spirit inspired them. So obviously, they heard the gospel and became Christians, but that's 2,000 years ago. What about today? Well, I want to read two letters to you. I know you can't read those, but I just took a picture of them and put them on there so that you could see that they're actual letters, see that they're typed out, maybe see some of the details. But I want to read two letters, and then I want to tell you who they're from. The first one says, "Dear Mr. Booth, hello, how are you today? Fine, I hope. Thank you very much for sending me the World Bible School introductory lesson in Bible. That was very kind of you. I mailed the completed lesson to Miss Stafford, so she should have it by now. And a week after I received your package, a Miss Mott from Arlington, Virginia, sent me the World Bible School correspondence course and the advanced course booklets. I filled out both of them and mailed them off to her to be graded. So now I've taken the complete course, but I still have one problem. This prison does not have a baptismal tank, and the prison chaplain is not sure if he can find someone to bring in a tank and baptize me. This has me very concerned. Would you be willing to help me find someone to baptize me? I've taken all the other steps now I need and I want," he underlines, "to be baptized. Well, I hope this letter finds you well and in good health." And then here's the second letter that followed that one a few months later. It says, "Dear Brother Elkins." Now that name may be familiar to some of you, Garland Elkins from the Memphis School of Preaching. But this person writes, "Dear Brother Elkins, greetings in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Thank you so much for sending that encouraging letter and enclosing your tract, The Lord's Church is Different. I enjoyed reading it and it meant a lot to me. Yes, I was baptized into Christ on May 10th around 2 p.m. It was a strange day to be baptized because that was the day of the solar eclipse around 12 noon. Most of the sun was covered, but by 2 p.m. the sun was bright and shining again when he was baptized. A month before I was baptized, I read Mr. Warren's book, The Bible Only Makes Christians Only, and the Only Christians. I'd never before realized the importance of baptism. All I'd ever heard before was that say a little prayer and then you're saved. The gospel tracts in the prison chapel never say anything about baptism. The tract you wrote is great. It's the only one that I've ever read that covers the whole plan of salvation and not one incomplete part of it. I would like to share the full plan of salvation with other inmates. I wonder if the Church of Christ has any tracts that are not copyrighted, and if they did, I could run them off on the library copier." All right, as you listen to that, doesn't that sound like somebody that's one of us? They're even saying the lingo. They're saying the Church of Christ, and they're saying the full plan of salvation. I mean, this is someone that gets the gospel and understands it. But you know who it is that wrote that? Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer. Now, this was back in 1994, and Phil Sanders, who does In Search of the Lord's Way, said that at one time, every inmate that was on death row in the state of Oklahoma was a member of the Church of Christ. Now, in one way, that doesn't say much for us, but they became Christians after they were there because churches in Oklahoma had such an active prison ministry. But can you imagine that? Someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, I mean, about as demented and deranged as you could possibly get on this earth, was willing to tenderize his heart, humble himself, read the Bible, study it, listen to it, apply it, and become a Christian. I mean, a serial killer in the New Testament, Paul wanted the gospel, but even serial killers today have been won over by Jesus Christ. But then what about some other examples? We could spend a lot of time here I want to share just a few that I've known about that have come to me through the work that I do with House to House, Heart to Heart. And this isn't a House to House commercial, but I just want to share these because they're what I know. They're a few of the ones that I know. We ran an issue a couple years ago that had an advertisement on the back for a DVD talking about the wrongs of abortion, women's rights, different things like that. And we had two ladies call us, one from Seattle, and I forget where the other one was from, but they said, hey, look, we wanted you to know that this one in particular from Seattle said, my husband and I are in our 40s. We have kids that are going off to college. We thought we were about to have an empty nest, and we got pregnant. We didn't mean to, and we don't want the baby, and we've been thinking about having an abortion. But this came in the mail the day after we were talking about it, and so we decided to reach out to the church. We asked for a copy of the DVD. We've watched it, and now we're convinced that we don't need to do that. That wouldn't be God's plan for this. God would be against that, and we've decided not to have an abortion. And they did that just because the church thought enough to reach out to them and to share some information. Met a woman in Chattanooga several years ago. She was at the East Ridge Church of Christ, who now oversees House to House, coincidentally enough. But she got House to House in the mail from East Ridge, and she went and met with the preacher and studied and became a Christian. But what's neat about her story is about 2 weeks after she became a Christian, she started not feeling well, and she went to the doctor, and she found out she had a life-threatening disease. And she actually passed away 2 months later. So it's not just that this church reached out, but it's also when they reached out. If they had waited one issue, if they had waited 2 months to reach out, it would have been too late. She would have been gone. But because they reached out, and they reached out when they did, she became a Christian. I was at Polishing the Pulpit a few years ago, and a guy came up to me and shook my hand and introduced himself. And he said, hey, I just want to tell you my story. He said he was from Arizona. He said, I woke up one night in my truck. It was about 5 in the morning. I didn't remember where I had been the night before. My head was pounding, and I felt like death. And he said, I knew at that time, in that moment, when I didn't remember so much of the day before, I had to do something. I had to change something, or I was going to die. And so he thought, I don't really know what to do except maybe get some religion. Find a church, see if they can help me. And he said, you know what? I don't hang out with the kind of people that go to church. I don't even know what church to go to or what to look for. And then he thought, a church sent me something recently. I don't remember what it was, but let me see if I can find it. He said he moved beer bottles and cigarette packets out of the bed of his truck, and he found a copy of House to House. And he went ahead and drove to the church that morning, got there about 6 in the morning, and just waited until the preacher got there. The preacher got there, and they met, they studied, they became friends, and this man became a Christian, and then he came to Polishing the Pulpit that next year. And he said, in the last year, I got all of the Polishing the Pulpit lessons from our preacher, and I've listened to every single one of them. It was just amazing to meet him. Why did this church have this conversion with this man? Was it because of the doctrine that they taught? No, although that's important, and that's what ultimately converted him. But it's just that they reached out. It's just that they tried. It was just a small thing, but to him it meant everything. I want to share just a couple more. This, if you can see this picture, this good-looking family. The man is named Freddie, but Freddie was in the Air Force, and he was in South Dakota, and Freddie went to some kind of drill or something one day, and he was leaving, and they were kind of new to the area, and he was thinking about looking for a church. He had grown up Baptist, and as he was leaving, he saw on the bulletin board a copy of House to House, and he pulled it off, and he took it with him, and he went home, and he and his wife read it, and they said, that's the kind of thing we've been thinking, too, as we read our Bible. We've been looking for a church that teaches that. And so he and his wife both studied with a preacher and became Christians. Well, the first year was kind of tough because Freddie's wife didn't really commit to everything, and she actually ended up cheating on him and leaving him for a while. And so she came forward at church one day and repented, and they got back together, but it was only a couple of weeks, and she said, I can't do this. I miss the old life. I want to run around, things like that. And so she went back to the man she had left him for. That man ended up killing her and then killing himself. And so now Freddie is a new Christian, pretty new Christian, and single. He goes off to preaching school at Bear Valley in Denver, and he meets his wife here, Ingrid, in his apartment complex. And so she asked, what are you doing here? And he said, well, I'm in preaching school, actually. She said, I'd love to know more about the Bible. And so they studied, he converted her, and now he preaches in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and they're two boys. But as far as we know, Freddie's not the only one that has been converted through House to House that has become a preacher. We have 4 pictures here. In the top right is Oscar Graves. He went to the Magnolia Bible Institute in Mississippi. Joe Wilson on the bottom went to West Virginia School of Preaching. And then Johnny Royal in the middle with his wife went to the Memphis School of Preaching. So these are all men that have been reached because the church thought enough to just reach out to them and try something. They were converted, and now they're preaching at congregations trying to do the same thing that happened with them. This is a picture of Alex Healy. He's from Oklahoma. He was on his deathbed. This is a picture is about 2 years old, I believe. And so Alex was dying, didn't have too many people to check on him. You ever been in a hospital even for a day? How boring is that? It's miserable. Well, he was there for a long time. And so he asked somebody, just go check my mail and bring it to me so I'll have something to do. And somebody brought him his mail. And in his mail was a copy of House to House. And so he read it, and he read it again, he read it again and again, and he contacted the church on the front. And this is him being baptized literally on his deathbed, with his deathbed with him. And as he told the preacher the next few days, as this post was shared all over Facebook, he said, my one regret in life is I won't be able to ever preach a sermon. I won't be able to teach anyone. And so his preacher shared his story and shared this picture, and so far it's been shared about 8,000 times on Facebook and has, I think, a few 100,000 likes. And so at this time, it was about halfway through that, and he told him, he said, Alex, you've preached to more people in one moment, one decision, than maybe I'll preach to in the rest of my life. And so what led him to be converted? Well, the church reached out to him, Alan Henley, and that was what did it for him. I want to share just a few more. I don't want to spend our whole time on this, though we could, but this is Amy. I was at the Freed-Hardeman Lectures, I think, 3 years ago, and this lady, Amy, came up to me at the booth and introduced herself, and she was acting a little weird. It was like she wanted to say something, but she didn't know how to say it. So she said, your publication is my favorite out of everything in here. And I said, oh, well, that's really nice. Why do you think that? Or asked her to elaborate. And she said that for her whole life, she'd grown up in a denomination. And when she would read the book of Acts and she would read the Gospels, and then they would teach something at church, something wasn't mixing, something wasn't jiving, something wasn't right. And she said, so I'd been thinking about finding another church just to see what else was out there, because I thought the truth had to be out there somewhere. And so she said, a church mailed me House to House for 2 years, and I threw it away. And she said, after 2 years, I thought, this church is trying to reach me. Why don't I just read it? And so she said she read it, and it kind of blew her mind. She's like, that's what I thought too. That's what I was looking for. So she read it again. She said she went out and bought a notebook, and she started saving them. And every time they would come in, she would read the previous one and then read over and over the current one. And she did that again for 2 more years. So this church reached out to her through House to House for 4 years. And at the end of 4 years, she walked into the congregation in Tennessee and said, hey, I'm ready to become a Christian. And I wish Michael were here. We could ask him. That doesn't happen very often, does it, Lucian? We don't have too many people come in. And so the preacher obviously said, well, hey, let's study a little bit. And she said, I'm glad to study, but I can tell you why I'm doing this and what I'm doing and the reasons I'm doing it. And so she was baptized. And so now her sons go to Freed-Hardeman. And that's just because the church cared enough to reach out. The picture on the top, let's see, what is it? Your top left, the older gentleman is 101 years old. And this picture is from 2 years ago. The reason I use that one instead of a more recent one is the one that happened recently, I couldn't find the picture. But within the past couple of months, another 101-year-old has been baptized at a congregation. As far as I know, it had nothing to do with House to House. But I just thought that that's interesting. Even at 101 years old, it's too late. They have listened to false teaching, or they've been indifferent for 50 years, 100 years. I'm glad that whoever was studying with this guy didn't think that, because he became a Christian. And we could go on and on. The one in the swimming pool under that is a friend of mine from college who baptized somebody a couple weeks ago after he used the material that we now have in the lobby to study with someone, just a simple 3-part study. We had a door knocking day, a brotherhood-wide door knocking day, and we had 600 churches go. Oak Hill took some people and went. When we were in Hawaii, we went. And because of that, 600 churches door knocking, 6 conversions were reported back, and this is one of the women. Now, if you listen to people today, they'll say door knocking doesn't work. And there's a lot of people that say this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and studying with someone in your home doesn't work, and showing Jewel Miller film strips doesn't work, and VBS doesn't work, and you say, well, then what does work? And they're at a loss. Well, for these 6 people's sake, I'm glad that not everyone bought into that door knocking doesn't work. Now, is it the best thing that we can possibly do? Obviously not. But different things are going to reach different people, and this is one of the ladies that became a Christian because of it. This is another one in Chalmette, Louisiana. Last year, and this will be the last house-to-house reference I have, I think, we had 370 baptisms reported back from our work. You think about that, that's more than 1 a day. This year, we're averaging more than 2 a day. But it's not just us. A lot of other Brotherhood works are having the same results. Just wanted to share a few with you. I asked the other Brotherhood works to report back the baptisms they knew of. World Video Bible School, and they do stuff all over Africa and India, but they reported 2,506 baptisms in 2019 and 650 restorations. The guy that wrote the Muslimless Shovel book, Michael Shank, I asked him, and he said he's getting so many he can't personally keep up with them, but it was somewhere between 300 and 500 that have been reported back to him in 2019 alone. House to House, last year was the most we've ever had in 1 year, and it'll be higher this year. GBN, the same thing. They had a couple per week last year, and it's more this year. I have seen personally close to 200 baptisms on Facebook in the past 2 months probably. And that's just with the limited pool of people that I know. And it's not a million people sharing it. It's just a few people sharing it. So my point in sharing all of this is, you know what that does for me? It lets me know that people still want the truth. You know, it would be super easy if nobody did. We could just throw up our hands and say, man, nobody wants the truth like they used to. And then we'd be free and clear because nobody wants the truth. What am I supposed to do? But the problem is, that's not true. People still want the truth today, just like they wanted the truth then, and in some ways more. Because as our society becomes less and less moral, as it becomes more and more evil, people realize that that's not the way to go, and they're looking for something that explains it, looking for something that's right and it's true. And these kind of things encourage me to never stop evangelizing. All right, number 2, for your outline. Number 2, you can teach someone. Now, I'll admit that I have not been as evangelistic since we moved here as I should have been. So I'm the first to say I am part of the problem. And I want to hold myself accountable to do better than that. But it's important to know that this isn't something that's reserved for our elders. This isn't something that's reserved for Michael, but it's something that every member does. When you read the book of Acts, you're impressed with the fact that just normal men and women were studying the Bible with people, even sometimes without inspiration, and people were becoming Christians. Jerry Jenkins, who used to preach at Roebuck Parkway, who started Maywood Christian Camp, he said if your congregation has 3 evangelistic people, and what he meant by that is they're either in a study or they're looking to get in one constantly. If you have 3, your building will grow beyond its walls. And he took Roebuck Parkway from a small group to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of members through his work. So he knows what he's talking about. So when we look at a congregation, we see, are they growing or not? And we see that they're not. We have to ask ourselves, well, then, man, do they have 3 evangelistic members? So that's what we have to do with ourselves. Ask, where are we in that? My daughter Lainey helped me print this, and she also helped me organize it. You know what that means? These are all out of order from this point forward. So it'll be a little bit of a guessing game as I go forward. All right, I want to share a story with you that a good joke, I think, that I heard from B.J. Clark. But he was talking about an elephant and a flea that were best friends. That's an unlikely pairing, odd couple maybe. But the elephant and the flea were going through the jungle. The flea's riding on top of the elephant. And they come to this bridge that's looking over a valley below. And it's got one of those bridges like in Chattanooga. It just swings over the valley. And so the elephant puts its foot on it and dust falls to the valley hundreds of miles below. So they decide, we're going to cross this bridge or not? We've got to go that way. So they say, okay, let's do it. So they walk across the bridge. And as soon as they get to the other side, the bridge collapses to the valley below into nothing but dust. And the flea looks over their shoulder and says, look what we did. What did the flea do? What did the flea do? Absolutely nothing. He was just along for the ride. The example for us is when we look at the things that Oak Hill does in the community, when we look at the Bible studies that we're having, any conversions that we have, it would be easy for us to say, hey, look what we did. And we can do more collectively than we can do individually, and everybody has different talents, no doubt about it. We have to be careful that we're not along for the ride like the flea. When we think about personal evangelism, this is something that has to be taken personally. It's not, as we mentioned, the church's responsibility. It'd be great if it was. That'd be great if I could just come and say, hey man, you're the hired Bible studier. Go get them. But this is really something that has to be taken personally by each one of us. You know, I see a lot of churches, right, in the work that I do in the travel. I think Oak Hill is to be commended in how we treat Michael. And what I mean by that is our elders are elders, and they let the preacher be the preacher. A lot of places, unfortunately, the preacher has to be the elder as well. He's the one making the visits. He's teaching every class. If there's a delinquent member, he's talking to him. We're blessed with the elders that we have. And so I'm thankful for that. But a lot of places, they expect the preacher to open and close the building, pick out the Bible curriculum, teach the Bible classes, mow the grass, set up for the fellowship, do the bulletin as well. So for us, I'm thankful that's not the case. But that still means that we have a personal responsibility. Look at Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 16, if you've got a Bible. I mean, this what we're trying to do is you and I are trying to say, okay, look, we're not where we need to be as far as evangelism is concerned. And there's not some great evangelism. If Oak Hill is going to reach gospel to people. So that's what you and I are having to condition ourselves to see, to believe, to think, to put into practice. Well, this verse is very important in that. But look at Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 16. And I mentioned this in one of Michael's classes a week or two ago, but it says, and he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers. Okay, God through inspiration is telling us, why do we have a preacher? Why do we have elders? Why do we have evangelists? Why do they have prophets? Okay, here's the answer. Here's what we think: to do all the work of the church, convert people, take care of everything, be the ones in charge, make all the decisions, do everything. If we're not careful, that's what we either think or act like, okay? But here's what the verse says, verse 12. To equip the saints for the work of ministry. You know what that means? When Michael is teaching, it's not so that he can then apply that and go out and do everything, but he is doing that so that you and I can take something away, whether it's a lot in one sermon or just one piece, but we can take something and we can go out and do the work of ministry. When Lucian's teaching a class, when Harold organizes the men's class, when we have the Tuesday classes, why are people putting effort into that? It's not so that we can come here and then that's our worship experience, our church experience. We did it at the building and we're done. It's to equip us for the work of ministry. So we look up and we see a problem in the church. Man, we're not taking care of the widows, the orphans. We're not having Bible studies with people. Well, are we going to storm to the elders and complain to them? Or are we going to be equipped for the work of ministry? Are we going to find a way to be the solution to these problems? Because that's what pastors, teachers, elders are for. And I encourage you to read the rest of that. It even impresses that even more upon you on your own time. Ephesians 4, 11 through 16. The second thing I wanted to mention kind of under this idea is, you don't have to know everything to talk to someone. You think about how deep we get into study. Jeremy loves to study. I love to study. I know Austin, if he were here, he really loves getting deep down. What's the Greek say? What did Josephus say back in the day? And all that stuff is important to me. It's interesting and it matters and it informs us. But at the same time, we can study the Bible with people without knowing all of that. Think about how long you've been a Christian. I was baptized when I was 10. I'm 37 now, so that's 27 years. Okay, if I'm not ready to study the Bible with somebody right now, when will I ever be? When I've been a Christian for 40 years, for 60, for 250? If I'm not ready now, I never will be. So I don't want to guilt anyone or shame anyone. I don't want to do that to myself. But I just say that to say, if we look up and we realize I'm not where I need to be, correct the will. Let's get back to the center. Let's get in our lane and let's get focused on what we need to do. We realize there's a problem. Let's do something about it. But we don't have to know everything to teach someone. Think about when you learned to read. You just started with those little letters, then you went to words. We were at Claire's in the mall today, and I saw a necklace, and I asked Harper, what's that say? And she said, love. And she was right. She's learning to read. It's really cool to see them doing that. Now me and Ashley can't spell stuff in front of them in the car. That's kind of a bummer, but that's okay. But think about that in relation to Bible study. Everything you've done in your life that you're good at, you started not being good at it. But you practiced. Maybe you had natural inclinations, but you practiced and you grew and you improved and you moved on. We have to do the same thing with Bible study. We start where we are and we get better. There's some material. I'm going to have to skip a few things for the sake of time, but there's some material as you leave on the left and go out of the auditorium into the foyer, I guess, that is an evangelism table that the elders have put together. You think about doing a potluck in the fellowship hall or the family room. We know where the plates are, right? And if we don't have plates, we're going to get upset. Well, when we think about evangelism, we don't always know where the evangelism supplies are. Where are our tools? Well, the elders have bought us some tools. Take some of those tools, look through them, get familiar with them so that you can study with someone. Let me mention two quick things, then we'll move on to our final point. Have a plan. And that would be a note that I would take. We're not going to remember everything when we leave here, but if you can pick one or two things and maybe start to apply them. This isn't a real doctrinal lesson. It's supposed to be practical. But have a plan. Think about how strategic God was. You find Acts 2, but before that you've got Joel 2, Daniel 2, Isaiah 2. God promises hundreds and thousands of years before the church comes, here's what's going to happen. Here's where it's going to be. It's going to come with power. Here's what it's going to look like. Think about how strategic God was in every move that he made. Now, I think it was Vince Lombardi that said, if you see a man on top of a mountain, he didn't fall there. If we want to get to somewhere, we have to have a plan to get there. So we've got to come up with a plan. Think about the people in your life that are not Christians. If you've got a brother, a cousin, a coworker, who's going to reach them? Is Michael going to do it? He doesn't even know him. He's never met him. He's not around them every day. He doesn't have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of reputation. He hasn't earned a Bible study with them. But you have. Who's going to reach them if you don't? That's a question I've got to ask myself as well. But have a plan. Put those people's name down on a list. Put it somewhere where you can pray for them. And think about everything you do as you interact with them is to get them to heaven. I've got a daughter-in-law, and she is a pain in my side, and we don't get along very well. Yeah, but she's married to your son, and he's not a Christian. Are you going to let your little trivial differences get in the way, or are you going to focus on, I'll take abuse after abuse if it's what I have to do to get the person to heaven? Make a list of names, pray about it, look for opportunities to bring them to Christ. And then the last thing on this point is feed your faith and your doubts will starve. You know, they say you're like the 5 people you're around the most. If you want to be successful in business, go be successful with successful people. If you want to be the town drunk, well, go. That's great, easy. Go find the town drunk at the bar and hang out with him, and you'll just become just like him. Well, if we want to be soul winners, we have to be around people that know how to win souls. We need to be around people that can mentor us. So if you're not somebody that knows how to win souls, be with somebody that does. We're blessed to have elders that if somebody walked in off the street and said, I want to study the Bible, we don't have to look around and say, like, oh, no, who's going to do it? They would just jump in and do it, which is, I'm telling you, it's not the case everywhere, but it's a blessing. Spend some time with them. Say, I would love to study the Bible with somebody, I just don't know how. Walk me through what you would do. Spend some time with soul winners. Surround yourself with them, find them, become friends with them. All right, and then the last thing, this is going to blow your mind. You can be nice to people you disagree with. Jeremy doesn't believe it. We already talked about it. He doesn't believe that's the case. But that's the case. You can be nice to people that you disagree with. Now, not in our world, not in the comment section on YouTube and not on Twitter. But in our world, the world of Christianity, we know a different way, a better way, and we know that we can be nice even to people that we disagree with. Think about 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. It's one of my favorite verses. As you turn there, I'm going to get a sip of water. I don't get to talk much at my house. So when I talk a lot, my mouth's not used to it, you know what I mean? But 1 Peter 3:15 is a favorite verse of mine. It says, sanctify the Lord in your heart. You know what sanctify means? If you don't, this passage doesn't mean much, but sanctify just means that you set apart a special place. This is the sanctuary. It's the same word. Would it be wrong if we moved the pews and put up a basketball goal in here? I mean, intrinsically, there's nothing wrong with that, but we don't do that because this isn't the gym. We have set this aside as a place where we just meet to worship. Okay, same thing with, what if we played with the collection plate and threw it as a frisbee? Well, God didn't put that out of heaven and sanctified in that way, but we wouldn't do that because that's not what it's for. The church paid for it to be set aside for a special reason. And so we just let it be for that, okay? We don't want to be unholy with something that we have collectively said, okay, we're going to set this aside. So sanctify just means you've set something aside. So sanctify the Lord God in your heart. That is, there's a part of your heart that just speaks Jesus, that just gets God, that thinks about spiritual things, okay? So sanctify the Lord God in your hearts. Be ready always to give an answer. Now, if it stopped there, this would be a scary verse. If it just said be able to give an answer, can you answer everything? I can't. None of us can, and we never will be able to. But thankfully it goes on and it says, to every man that asks you a reason of the hope that is in you. Okay, you don't have to answer every biblical question. What does 1 Corinthians, 15, what's it mean when it talks about baptism for the dead? What's our body going to look like when we get to heaven? I've got no idea, really, and none of us do. But what does it mean to be a Christian? Why are you a Christian? Why are you always in such a good mood? Why do things not bother you as much? Tell me about your church. Those are questions that we have to have a ready answer for. We don't go to the preacher. It's not time to look in our Bible. That has to just be in our heart. You know, where did you meet Ashley? What kind of stuff do y'all like to do together? Why did you pick your kids' names? I don't need to go to a folder and flip through it because that's in my heart so much I just know it. Okay? That's what this verse is saying. Not everything in the Bible, not everything in life, thankfully, but you have to know why you're a Christian, how you became one. You need to be able to tell somebody else how to become one. But here's the reason I bring it up. Look at the last part of the verse. Give an answer to everybody that asks you, like a jerk, making sure that they know you're right and they're wrong. Ooh, that sounds good, doesn't it? Is that what the verse says? That just flows off the tongue, right? No, of course not. What does the verse say? It says to give an answer with meekness and fear. You know, a lot of times our society has things twisted, right? I mean, it's crazy out there right now, especially the internet. What people are saying that this is normal and this is not normal is just, it's like we're in crazy town. I want to wake up, right? But one thing our society does is they say that a lot of people say men can't be meek and gentle. Well, this verse says otherwise. Christians are supposed to be defined by meekness and by fear. You know, sometimes you call somebody gentle or meek. They're like, meet me in the parking lot. I'll show you who's meek, who's gentle. That's like an insult. But biblically, that's a compliment. You think about Moses, it says he was the meekest man of his day, and Jesus was lowly and humble. So the two great lawgivers, the one in the Old Testament and the one in the New Testament, were both defined by meekness and fear. Even though they came down and they breathed out and they taught and they exemplified the law, what were they defined by? Meekness. You know, we do need to be bold from time to time, but we also need to be able to be gentle, to wear a spirit of humility. Sometime when you get a chance, read Galatians chapter 5, and I think we're going to study Galatians after Acts, but read Galatians 5 and look at the works of the flesh, and then look at the fruit of the Spirit. And then think about just this idea. How many people are more comfortable with the works of the flesh than the fruit of the Spirit? Like some men, if you said, I love you, they would be much more comfortable with dealing with some of the sinful things up there. No, I'd rather be fighting and backbiting and gossiping. Or if someone called you merciful or patient or joyful, some of those things have a negative connotation, so that some people would rather be associated with the works of darkness. But we have to be able to embody those fruit of the Spirit. All right, great. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So Johnny was pointing out that the ESV on 1 Peter 3:15 says gentleness and respect, which I think is really the essence of what the verse is saying. So the last thing that I wanted to mention, and we'll be done here, but is that the way to combat this, feeling like we have to fight every battle, we have to be right, we have to put people in their place, we have to be rude, we have to be bullies like we're surrounded with, is to carry ourselves like Jesus. And I mentioned Moses from the old law and Jesus from the new law, but Philippians 2:7 says Jesus humbled himself and came in the form of a servant. If there's ever anyone in the whole existence of the universe that could say, I'm here, I've arrived, everybody bow at my feet, let's do it the way I want to do it all the time, I need some respect, why haven't I been in a better place, where's my food, I need to go first, it was Jesus. And how did he act? The exact opposite. He came into a lowly, poor family, was born in the front of someone's house that barely had any room for him, had to share space with the animals, lived a life of sacrifice, and was killed on the cross for us. And he's the one person that should have or could have demanded better. But another verse to end on, maybe 2 Timothy 2:4 says, and the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle unto all men. And this is the key, apt to teach and patient. You know, apt to teach doesn't mean like, I might, you just watch out. I might teach somebody one day. It means able to. So we get ourselves to the point where we can. So I want us to just have, as we end, some self-reflection for ourselves and say, as great as Oak Hill is, as great as the Church of Christ always has been and always will be, do we love where we are now? Do we like the direction that we may be going evangelistically? If so, great. We don't have to change anything. If not, then what are we going to do about it? Are we going to wait on somebody else to come in? Are we going to try to hire somebody? Are we going to hope things get better? Or are we going to say, man, this church needs 3 soul winners, 3 families, 3 individuals that can be soul winners. I want to try to learn to be that person. I want to say, I know a lot already, I'm ready to go, or I don't know everything that I need to know. I'm going to ask somebody that does know, like one of our elders, like Rob Whitaker, who's going to be coming in a few months, and I'm going to learn how. I'm going to set myself a deadline. In 3 months, in 6 months, or in a year, I'm going to be one of the soul winners, because I know that that's what God's kingdom needs at this time. And I don't want to be like the Israelites who enjoyed things that they didn't plan. So the last thing I'll say is this, just to reiterate what we've been through already. People do want the gospel. They did in the Bible, and they do now. We can't take the easy way out and say they don't. We can teach someone. I mean, it's our privilege, it's our responsibility, and God expects us to. And then the last thing, we can be kind to people, even if they disagree with us and treat us ill. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We'll turn it over to Lucian for some announcements.